Every city shines the same after midnight. Sterile light reflected on wet pavement like a wound pretending to heal. You walk through the glow, surrounded by people who look alive but move like reflections. Polished, rehearsed, unreachable. Their faces lit by screens instead of stars. Their laughter filtered through glass. Everyone performing happiness, yet no one truly watching. We were promised a better life, brighter, faster, more connected. And for a while, we believed it. We measured success in clarity, perfection, control. But somewhere in that chase for flawless light, we forgot that warmth isn't the same as brightness. Now everything glows, but nothing feels alive. The cold light of modern life exposes everything, except the truth. It hides our loneliness behind sharp edges, our fear beneath aesthetics. We post smiles as proof of survival, edit away the cracks that make us real. We no longer live to experience, we live to appear. And every time the flash goes off, a little more of our soul dissolves into the image. This is the story of that illusion, the one we built with our own hands, pixel by pixel, until we forgot how to touch without glass between us. A confession of what happens when light replaces warmth and perfection replaces presence. Because beneath every curated life, there's still a pulse, trembling, imperfect human, waiting to be felt again. It's not about the lights. It's about what they hide. The perfect image is a kind of silence. It says everything we want the world to believe, and nothing we actually feel. You can see it everywhere. The minimalist room, the golden hour smile, the effortless success. A choreography of control designed to hide the chaos beneath. We live in a culture that mistakes beauty for peace. If it looks calm, it must be healed. If it looks organized, it must be whole. But order isn't always harmony. Sometimes it's just suppression, painted white. Perfection has become the new poverty, a poverty of depth, of texture, of truth. The cleaner the surface, the more it hides. Every perfect life is an architecture of restraint, built to keep pain from leaking through the cracks. But pain always finds a way. The aesthetics of emptiness aren't malicious, they're a cry for control. Because chaos terrifies us. So we filter it, frame it, format it until it fits inside a box we can admire, but never enter. And yet beauty, without vulnerability, becomes static. An image that glows, but doesn't breathe. Maybe that's why we stare so long at perfect lives. Not because we envy them, but because deep down, we sense the hollow echo behind their light. We see ourselves in that silence. We recognize the same hunger for something that can't be photographed. The curtain rises every morning, and we play our roles. Flawless skin, effortless smiles, success performed with the precision of an algorithm. Life has become a stage, but the applause is silent, and the audience is everyone. Perfection used to be an aspiration. Now it's an expectation. We curate ourselves not to express truth, but to avoid disappointment. Every post, every angle, every phrase rehearsed, not for authenticity, but for approval. And when the act ends, when the screen fades to black, we are left with an empty stage and the echo of our own applause. In this theater, no one really lies. They simply omit. They edit the pain, crop the doubt, mute the longing. We trade chaos for coherence, humanity for harmony. But coherence without contradiction isn't beauty. It's anesthesia. We scroll through this grand performance believing it's real, forgetting that the perfect life we envy is also someone else's disguise. Everyone pretending, everyone exhausted, everyone terrified that if they stop acting, the silence will reveal the truth, that we are all improvising. Maybe the real tragedy isn't that we perform. It's that we no longer know how to leave the stage. The mask fits too well. The lights feel too familiar. And somewhere between the applause and the emptiness, we begin to believe that the character we play is who we truly are. But perfection, no matter how dazzling, is hollow. It shines, but it doesn't breathe. And the soul, like an actor trapped in its own role, starts whispering for something messier, truer, something that hurts a little, just to remind itself that it's still alive. Happiness used to be something spontaneous, a byproduct of living, not an objective to achieve. But in a world addicted to optimization, even joy has become engineered. We no longer feel happiness, we manufacture it. We chase it like a formula. A certain job, a certain body, a certain home bathed in warm, curated light. We assemble it piece by piece, like a digital collage of emotions we've seen but rarely experienced. The result is a perfect replica, the appearance of contentment without the weight of meaning. Synthetic happiness is efficient. It asks for no risk, no surrender, no pain. It's the smile we wear for the photo, the gratitude post written from exhaustion, the affirmation whispered to convince ourselves it's working. But real happiness doesn't perform. It disturbs. It arrives uninvited, sometimes disguised as loss, as failure, as silence. We've been taught that happiness is a choice, but the truth is more fragile. It's a discovery. It grows in cracks, not in perfection. It requires contrast. To feel the light, we must first admit the dark. The algorithm tells us to eliminate sadness, but the absence of sadness is not joy. It's numbness. Maybe the reason we feel empty isn't because we lack happiness, but because we've replaced the unpredictable pulse of emotion with something synthetic, smooth, and safe. Happiness without heartbreak, light without shadow. And yet, somewhere deep down, the soul rebels, because it knows that the only joy worth feeling is the one that costs something to feel. There was a time when distance meant absence, when being apart hurt because it mattered. Letters crossed oceans, words carried weight, waiting had meaning. Now, distance has lost its warmth. Everything is instant, yet nothing truly arrives. We are close in pixels, far in presence, connected but untouched. Technology promised to erase the miles between us. But in dissolving distance, it also dissolved depth. When every moment can be reached with a tap, we stop reaching with our hearts. The chase that once made affection sacred, the anticipation, the silence, the longing, has been replaced by constant availability. And with it, the temperature of intimacy has changed. There's a strange comfort in physical space, in the ache of missing someone, in the quiet recognition that love survives the gap. Distance used to make the soul expand, now it just scrolls. We fill the emptiness with words that mean less because they cost nothing to send. But warmth requires friction. It's born of resistance, of waiting, of touch that cannot be automated. Without distance, there is no desire, only consumption. We've confused proximity with connection, forgetting that presence is not a signal, but an energy that travels slower than Wi-Fi, deeper than text, carrying something technology can't transmit. Soul. Maybe we were never meant to be this close, this constantly available, this endlessly reachable. Because the heart, unlike the network, needs space to feel. It needs the distance that allows absence to become affection and silence to become a kind of prayer. Every screen is a mirror now, not of who we are, but of who we wish to be. Each reflection carefully composed, each moment rehearsed before the shutter blinks. We no longer speak into silence, we speak into glass. And the glass always speaks back, with likes, with echoes, with the faint illusion of being seen. But reflections are tricky. They show us just enough to believe, but never enough to belong. We scroll through faces that look perfect under artificial light, forgetting that the same glow that flatters also blinds. We confuse recognition with connection, validation with understanding. We've turned our need for reflection into addiction, an endless cycle of projection and response, where the echo of approval replaces the warmth of touch. The more we stare into the glass, the more it rewrites us. Our gestures adapt, our voices soften, our truths shrink. We learn which parts of ourselves photograph well and which do not. Soon, the reflection becomes the director, and the human behind it, the obedient actor. But even glass remembers fingerprints. Beneath the polished illusion, the human trace remains, the smudge, the imperfection, the evidence of presence. It's there, subtle but stubborn, proof that something real once touched this surface. One day, maybe, we'll look at our reflections and see not the echo, but the echo's origin. The person behind the pose, the soul behind the feed. And we'll realize the glass was never meant to define us. It was meant to remind us that what matters most can't be captured, only felt. Perfection isn't just an idea anymore. It's a business model. Somewhere between aspiration and anxiety, it became currency. Every flawless image, every curated morning routine, every golden frame of success feeds an invisible marketplace, a system that trades not in money, but in self-worth. We scroll through advertisements disguised as lives, smiles that sell skincare, sunsets that sell ambition, bodies that sell belief. The algorithm doesn't just show us perfection, it monetizes our hunger for it. Each scroll says the same quiet thing: you could be more. And so we pay, with time, with envy, with the slow erosion of contentment. This economy thrives on dissatisfaction. It must keep you reaching, comparing, consuming. Because if you ever felt complete, the system would collapse. Perfection has no endpoint. It's designed to stay just out of reach. That's how it keeps you loyal. We've mistaken desire for identity. We curate not what we love, but what others might envy. And every time we sell an image of ourselves, the vacation, the success, the effortless peace, we invest deeper into the illusion. Soon, we're not living a life, but managing a brand. But the market of perfection can't sell what the soul actually needs. It can't sell presence or laughter that interrupts or love that doesn't fit the frame. Those things aren't profitable because they can't be replicated. They're too human, too real. Maybe that's where freedom begins, in refusing to participate in the commerce of illusion, to stop selling yourself and start living yourself. Because a perfect life might be expensive, but an honest one is priceless. It's strange how something so cold can feel so comforting. The soft blue light of a phone screen at midnight, it fills the darkness just enough to trick us into thinking we're not alone. We scroll, we read, we watch, faces, words, laughter, digital ghosts flickering through glass, whispering connection while offering distance. There's warmth in it, but it's artificial. A simulation of belonging that fades the moment the screen goes dark. We mistake it for intimacy because it feels close. But proximity without presence is only illusion. The glow calms us, but it never truly holds us. Human warmth isn't made of pixels. It's built from the pauses between words, from the trembling in a voice, from the pulse that skips when someone looks at you and actually sees you. No machine can replicate that trembling imperfection, the uneven rhythm that makes emotion real. But digital warmth is seductive because it's safe. It demands nothing. It never interrupts. It lets us curate affection without the risk of rejection. In this quiet simulation, love becomes manageable. And that's why we can't stop touching the glass, hoping it touches back. Still, every now and then when the messages stop, when the battery dies, the silence feels heavier than it should. Because deep down, we know. No amount of light can replace a heartbeat. And no signal, no matter how strong, can transmit the true temperature of the human soul. A smile can hide entire worlds. It's the most practiced gesture of the modern age. A shield polished for every camera, every meeting, every moment of quiet despair. We've learned to smile on command, to turn our faces into masks that say, "I'm fine," even when the soul is unraveling beneath. The fragile smile is a language everyone speaks but no one admits to. It's the social contract of survival. You smile, I smile, we both pretend the performance is enough. Behind those curved lips lies exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying emotions you no longer have the energy to explain. We were told happiness is strength, so we forged our smiles into armor, bright enough to blind others from the pain, convincing enough to almost blind ourselves. But the problem with armor is that it gets heavy. Soon, even joy feels like labor. In photographs, we look radiant. In reality, we feel translucent, a flicker of warmth inside a face that has forgotten how to rest. Because smiling all the time isn't living. It's surviving beautifully. But there's beauty in the fracture, too. In the moment the smile falters, in the tremor that reveals the truth beneath control. That's when connection begins, when perfection cracks and the raw light escapes. A real smile doesn't need to convince anyone. It trembles. It hesitates. It appears for no reason at all, and that's what makes it honest, because it wasn't practiced. It was felt. We no longer pray in churches. We worship in pixels. The altar has become the screen, and our offerings are our images. Every post, every picture, every update, a silent prayer. See me, approve me, remember me. The image is our modern idol, flawless, eternal, untouchable. We curate ourselves like relics, polishing away the parts that bleed. We think visibility is power, but it's dependency disguised as devotion. Because once the image exists, it begins to own us. It demands maintenance, attention, sacrifice. The digital self becomes the high priest of our identity, and the real one kneels quietly in its shadow. We call it self-expression, but it's closer to self-erasure. The more we perform, the less we feel. The more we broadcast, the less we belong. And every time we edit our lives to look divine, we lose one more fragment of what made them human. The cult of image doesn't ask you to believe, only to appear. It doesn't promise salvation, only relevance. And relevance, like faith, must be renewed daily. One missed post, one fading algorithm, and the God forgets your name. But there is a quiet blasphemy left, to exist without witness, to live moments that leave no trace, to let them vanish, unrecorded, unfiltered, unshared. Because in that disappearance, the soul reclaims its face from the image that stole it. Perhaps freedom now isn't invisibility. It's irrelevance. To no longer be a product of appearance, but a presence that doesn't need proof. We've never seen ourselves so clearly. Every pore, every flaw, every angle preserved in ruthless precision. And yet, for all this clarity, we've never felt more blurred. We live in high definition, but we feel in static. The closer the camera gets, the farther we drift from ourselves. Loneliness has evolved. It no longer hides in empty rooms. It hides in full screens. We share, we post, we connect. And still, the silence echoes. We're surrounded by faces, yet untouched by presence. Every message becomes a performance. Every "how are you?" a ritual with no expectation of truth. Technology made it possible to never be alone, but in doing so, it also made it impossible to be alone, to sit with our thoughts without distraction, to hear our own pulse without interference. Now solitude feels foreign, even frightening, so we drown it in brightness, scrolling through other people's lives just to feel the illusion of company. Loneliness in high definition isn't emptiness, it's overload. Too many connections, none that penetrate. Too many signals, not enough silence. It's the ache of constant contact that never touches the soul. There was a time when loneliness led to reflection, when the absence of others created the presence of self. Now, it only multiplies the noise. Because the modern world doesn't fear isolation, it monetizes it. Every ad, every app, every feed whispers the same cure. Don't disconnect. But true healing might begin with that very act. To turn off the light, to step away from the feed, to sit in the dark long enough to recognize your own shadow again. Only in that darkness does loneliness begin to soften. Not as absence, but as invitation. Silence used to be sacred. It was where thought began, where feeling took shape, where truth could breathe. But now silence feels unbearable, an emptiness we rush to fill. We live in a constant soundtrack, music, messages, hums of machines, the faint static of modern existence. We've replaced reflection with distraction, and in doing so, we've forgotten that not all noise is sound. The perfect noise is the one that never stops, loud enough to drown the mind, soft enough to pass as normal. It lives in our pockets, our timelines, our heads. It comforts us with the illusion of movement, tricking us into believing that stimulation is life. But noise, like light, can be deceptive. It gives the feeling of momentum while keeping us perfectly still. We scroll, we refresh, we consume. 1,000 fragments of attention, none that land deep enough to transform. We crave silence but fear what it might reveal. Because silence has a voice, and it tells the truth. The perfect noise is a kind of anesthesia. It numbs without pain, distracts without healing. And the longer we live inside it, the more we mistake numbness for peace. We call it productivity, engagement, relevance. But beneath it all, the soul whispers for quiet. A quiet not of absence, but of meaning. Where the world stops talking long enough for us to hear ourselves again. To escape the perfect noise, you don't need to go far. You just need to stop contributing to it. Turn down the volume of performance, of consumption, of control. Let the silence arrive. Because in a world that profits from your distraction, attention is an act of resistance. We've built a world that worships convenience. One click, one tap, one instant result. Everything faster, smoother, simpler. But beneath that ease lies a quiet exhaustion, a strange heaviness that comes from never having to struggle. Effort used to give meaning. The waiting, the failing, the trying again. Those were the textures of being alive. Now friction feels like failure. We no longer chase mastery, we chase immediacy. And in eliminating difficulty, we've also eliminated depth. Ease was meant to liberate us, but it's made us soft in the soul. Without resistance, we lose resilience. Without difficulty, we lose devotion. The things that once transformed us, love, art, faith, creation, now risk being reduced to content, consumed instead of lived. The weight of ease is paradoxical. It's the fatigue of never lifting anything heavy, the spiritual burnout of effortless existence. We scroll through lives built for speed and forget that meaning has its own tempo. Slow, stubborn, deliberate. Some truths refuse to download instantly. Technology promised to save us time, but time without struggle becomes hollow. Because it's the uphill climb, the delay, the uncertainty. Those are what carve the contours of fulfillment. Without them, life becomes a smooth surface where nothing sticks. Maybe ease was never the goal. Maybe the soul was designed for tension, the stretch between what is and what could be. Because comfort, left unchecked, becomes a cage. And sometimes the only way to feel alive again is to do something that demands effort, something that hurts, something that reminds you you're still capable of carrying weight. Desire is the blueprint of our humanity, invisible, intricate, alive. It's what moves cities, builds art, starts wars, writes poems. It's the tension between what we have and what we ache for. But in the modern world, desire has been redesigned, streamlined, monetized, engineered. We no longer desire, we consume. Desire once lived in absence, in mystery, in the delicious ache of not yet. Now it lives in immediacy, a catalog of impulses on demand. Every craving can be satisfied before it even fully forms. And when everything is available, nothing is sacred. The architecture of desire has shifted from longing to looping. Algorithms anticipate what we'll want next, feeding us endlessly to keep the hunger alive but never fulfilled. We mistake stimulation for satisfaction, and in doing so, we forget that the purpose of desire was never possession. It was connection, creation, becoming. Desire was meant to stretch us, to reveal the space between who we are and who we could be. But we've built walls around it, turning it into a system of controlled yearning, a factory of pleasure without intimacy. True desire can't be automated. It requires distance, resistance, risk. It thrives in the unknown, the unreachable, the imperfect. That's where the fire lives, not in what's easy to obtain, but in what demands something real from us in return. To desire deeply again is to rebel. To crave not what glows, but what grounds. Not what's sold to you, but what transforms you. Because the soul doesn't want more, it wants meaning. And meaning, unlike everything else, cannot be delivered overnight. Happiness lingers like perfume in an empty room, a trace of what once was, too faint to grasp, too familiar to forget. We chase it not because we remember how it felt, but because we remember how we looked when we had it. The modern world has turned happiness into a shadow, an aesthetic, a signal, a status update. We display it in fragments, vacations, smiles, sunsets cropped just right. But behind each image there's an echo, the unspoken admission that something is missing. Not joy itself, but its authenticity. Ghosts of happiness haunt us through memories we curate to convince ourselves we're still alive. We replay the moments that looked like happiness, mistaking nostalgia for proof of meaning. And yet, the more we cling to the memory, the further we drift from the feeling. Real happiness isn't loud. It doesn't demand to be seen. It happens quietly, in laughter that interrupts thought, in the stillness after tears, in the unplanned, imperfect intervals of being. But that kind of happiness doesn't photograph well, so we learn to prefer its ghost, cleaner, safer, eternally smiling. The tragedy is that we've come to fear genuine happiness because it refuses to be permanent. We'd rather own its shadow than risk losing its light. But ghosts don't heal, they repeat. They keep us trapped in a loop of almost living, haunted by the versions of ourselves who once felt something real. Maybe the way to find happiness again is to stop trying to capture it, to let it pass through us like light through open hands. Because joy, when held too tightly, becomes memory. But when released, it becomes life again. The mirror used to be a witness, a silent accomplice to our becoming. It reflected not perfection, but presence. Now, it remembers nothing. Each glance erased by the next, each reflection replaced before meaning can settle. We've taught mirrors to forget us as quickly as we forget ourselves. Every day we return to them, to adjust, to inspect, to prove we still exist. But the reflection that looks back is never still. It shifts with our expectations, our filters, our fatigue. We no longer see ourselves, we see the version the world prefers. A performance repeated until even the mirror believes it. In this ritual of self-surveillance, identity becomes a maintenance task. We clean, correct, conceal, not to know ourselves, but to remain acceptable. We call it confidence, but it's dependence. On feedback, on validation, on a fragile image that disappears when the light changes. A mirror without memory cannot love you. It reflects only what you present, not what you've survived, not what you've dreamed. It shows the surface of emotion, never the root. And so we become trapped in reflection, a constant negotiation between how we look and how we feel, until the latter stops mattering. But sometimes, by accident, you catch your reflection unprepared, in a window, a puddle, a darkened screen, and for a split second, You see it, the face behind the performance. Tired, honest, alive. The version untouched by expectation. That's not the mirror's memory returning. It's yours. A reminder that your reflection is not proof of existence. Your existence is proof enough. In a world built for speed, everything must move quickly. Products, information, relationships, even feelings. We've learned to discard what doesn't satisfy instantly. We swipe, replace, delete. And somewhere in that cycle, the soul became disposable too. The modern heart has an expiration date. Once it stops performing, once it stops entertaining, producing, pleasing, it's quietly replaced by another. Not because we've stopped caring, but because caring takes time, and time feels like the one luxury no one can afford. We've confused renewal with replacement. Instead of mending, we upgrade. Instead of grieving, we distract. Instead of growing, we move on. And yet, each departure leaves a trace, a faint residue of something that was meant to stay longer than we allowed it to. Disposable souls live light, unattached, unrooted, unscarred. But lightness without gravity isn't freedom, it's drift. Without the weight of memory, of failure, of devotion, life becomes smooth, frictionless, meaningless. What makes the soul precious is precisely what makes it breakable. Its capacity to care beyond logic, to hurt without reason, to love without end. A disposable world has no room for that kind of endurance. It mistakes fragility for flaw and depth for inefficiency. But the soul was never meant to be efficient. It was meant to linger, to hold, to ache, to remember. And every time we choose to stay instead of swipe, to forgive instead of replace, we remind the world and ourselves that the soul is not a product, it's a promise. To feel deeply has become a privilege. In a culture anesthetized by speed, those who still pause to ache, to wonder, to care, they are the few who still remember what it means to be alive. We treat emotion like an inconvenience, a glitch in the system. Productivity has no patience for heartbreak, and algorithms have no empathy for grief. Feeling is now a luxury, not because it's rare, but because it's risky. It slows you down. It makes you unpredictable. And in a world obsessed with control, vulnerability is an act of rebellion. So we learn to moderate our emotions the way we moderate light, just bright enough to look alive, never bright enough to burn. But numbness, disguised as balance, is not peace. It's self-preservation gone too far. We confuse calm with emptiness, control with disconnection. And beneath that perfect composure, something fragile suffocates, the very pulse that once made us human. To feel again is to lose efficiency. It's to be late, distracted, undone. It's to cry in a meeting, to laugh in the wrong moment, to break your own rules just because your heart demanded it. But that chaos, that trembling honesty, is where meaning begins. The luxury of feeling isn't about emotion itself, it's about permission, to hurt without apologizing, to care without irony, to love without armor. Because in the end, a perfectly regulated life may protect you from pain, but it also shields you from wonder. And wonder, once lost, is the only thing the soul can never buy back. Beauty was never meant to be effortless. It was meant to wound, gently, profoundly, reminding us of everything fragile, fleeting, alive. But somewhere along the way, beauty became surface. We made it light, consumable, safe. We stripped it of its gravity so that it could fit in a frame. The true weight of beauty lies in its impermanence. It hurts precisely because it fades. A sunset that ends too soon, a face that changes with time, a love that burns bright only once. Beauty is the ache that follows awareness. To see it fully is to accept loss as part of the view. We've tried to escape that ache by manufacturing endless perfection, filters to smooth what's real, symmetry to erase what's human. But beauty without pain becomes sterile. It no longer moves us. It decorates us. We admire it the way we admire machines, precise, unfeeling, immaculate. True beauty resists that polish. It trembles. It decays. It exists only because it can't last. And in that transience lies its power, to make us remember that nothing we love is guaranteed. The weight of beauty is emotional gravity. It pulls us toward truth, forcing us to feel the cost of existence. To see beauty clearly is to understand mortality, and to love anyway. That's what no algorithm can replicate, what no photograph can hold. The unbearable, exquisite tension of something so fragile it almost breaks, and yet somehow continues to shine. Perfection was supposed to bring peace, the calm after improvement, the quiet of things finally right. But it never arrives. Perfection hums like an engine that never stops, vibrating just beneath our thoughts. It's the soft, constant noise of self-correction, that subtle voice whispering, "You could be better." We polish, refine, adjust. Every detail becomes a battlefield, the angle of a photo, the tone of a message, the phrasing of a thought. We pursue flawlessness as if it were freedom, but what we really build is a prison made of subtle noise, a mental static that won't let silence exist. Perfection doesn't soothe, it buzzes. It fills the room with invisible tension, a restlessness that masquerades as ambition. And in that restless hum, we lose the rhythm of being human. We forget that mistakes breathe, that asymmetry sings, that silence, real silence, is born only when we stop editing our own existence. The noise of perfection grows louder in success. The more polished the image, the more fragile the peace. We see it in eyes that smile but do not rest, in lives that gleam but never settle, because perfection doesn't end anxiety. It just hides it under control. To quiet the noise, we must let something remain imperfect, a word left unedited, a flaw left visible, a truth left raw. Only then does the hum subside. And in the crack where precision breaks, we hear life again. Uneven, uncertain, alive. Perfection demands silence, but life, real life, demands sound. And sometimes, the most beautiful thing we can do is stop tuning the instrument and finally let the song play. Light reveals form, but shadow reveals truth. In the half-light, we stop performing. Our features soften, our defenses blur, and what remains is something raw, uncurated, profoundly human. The shadow doesn't lie. It simply shows what light refuses to touch. We've been taught to fear darkness, to associate it with loss, with failure, with shame. But there's a kind of tenderness that only lives in shadow, the quiet acceptance of imperfection, the humility of not needing to shine. In the dark, we can finally stop being beautiful and start being real. Every person carries two stories. The one the world sees, polished and framed, and the one that breathes quietly beneath, awkward, unfinished, true. The shadow is where those stories meet. It's not the opposite of light, but its partner, the space that gives illumination its meaning. When we deny our shadows, we flatten ourselves into caricatures. We become outlines of identity, recognizable but hollow. To embrace the shadow is not to worship the dark. It's to reclaim the parts of ourselves that light alone could never explain. There's an intimacy in that surrender, in sitting beside your fears without turning away, in admitting your envy, your weakness, your longing, and realizing that these two are evidence of life. Because shadow is not absence, it's presence, in a quieter tone. Maybe the soul doesn't seek constant light. Maybe what it truly desires is balance, a place where brightness and shadow hold each other, and the self, finally, feels whole. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of everything we've been avoiding. It's the pause between questions, the space where truth finally has room to breathe. Most people think silence is empty, but if you listen long enough, you realize it's full. of thoughts unfinished, emotions unnamed, memories waiting for permission to speak. We've been trained to fear it, to fill it with conversation, with noise, with movement, because silence demands honesty, and honesty requires stillness, and stillness reveals what performance hides. That's why the world feels allergic to quiet. Silence exposes the cost of pretending. There are many kinds of silence. The peaceful one, where the heart finally rests. The heavy one, when words would only bruise. The sacred one, when awe replaces explanation. Each carries a different truth, and together they form the anatomy of being human. When we lose our connection to silence, we lose our capacity to listen, not just to others, but to ourselves. The soul speaks in whispers, never in noise. But to hear it, you must be willing to turn down everything else, the endless hum of progress, the chatter of comparison, the internal critic that confuses volume with value. In silence, we remember that thought has texture, that time stretches, that meaning moves slower than sound. It's there, in the hush after chaos, that we rediscover our rhythm. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's origin. It's the point where every sound, every idea, every life begins again. We spend our lives constructing ourselves, brick by brick, title by title, post by post. We call it identity, but most of it is armor. Beliefs we didn't choose, habits we didn't question, versions of ourselves built to survive rather than to feel. But there comes a moment, quiet, terrifying, inevitable, when the structure begins to crack. When the things that once defined you no longer fit. When your name, your role, your reflection feel like borrowed clothes. That's the beginning of the unmaking. The moment you stop building and start listening. The unmade self isn't destruction. It's revelation. It's what remains when you stop trying to be consistent. When you stop mistaking stability for truth. To unmake yourself is to let go of the architecture of certainty, to admit that becoming human is not about completion, but about continuous collapse and renewal. We're afraid of that collapse because it feels like failure. But maybe it's just evolution in disguise. Every breakdown is a release. The shedding of identity's too small for who you're becoming. You don't lose yourself in the unmaking. You uncover the parts that were never allowed to speak. The world rewards coherence, but the soul grows through contradiction. And when you finally stop holding yourself together, you discover something unexpected in the ruins. Not emptiness, but space. The space to rebuild, not as who you were told to be, but as who you truly are. The unmade self is not the end of identity. It's the beginning of authenticity. There's a kind of light that doesn't illuminate. It exposes. It shows everything but reveals nothing. The sterile white of office bulbs, the cold glare of endless screens, the fluorescent hum of a world that never sleeps. It's the light that forgets we are human. Once, light was intimate. It flickered. Candlelight, sunrise, the golden breath of dusk. It moved with us, warmed us, made time visible. But now it's constant, merciless, indifferent. It erases shadows, flattens texture, sterilizes emotion. We live beneath it like insects under observation, always seen, never understood. This light has no memory. It doesn't remember the first smile it touched, or the last tear it reflected. It treats everything equally, and in that equality, we become invisible. In chasing a world without darkness, we've built a light too bright for meaning to survive. We mistake visibility for presence, as if being seen were the same as being known. But light without memory cannot hold love. It can only measure it. It can show your face, but not your feeling. It can record your life, but never remember who you were. Maybe that's why we crave night so deeply. Not because it hides us, but because it remembers us. In the dark, we belong to ourselves again. The world softens, details blur, And what's left is essence. A hum, a breath, a heartbeat. We don't need more light. We need light that listens. Light that forgets perfection and remembers warmth. Because the brightest world is not always the most alive. Sometimes it's just the most alone. Absence has a form, delicate, invisible, exact. It outlines what was once there, what almost remained, what never arrived. We rarely see it, but we feel it everywhere. In the empty chair, the unread message, the quiet where a voice should be. It's the architecture of loss, sculpted by memory's trembling hands. The modern world has little patience for absence. It fills every gap, replaces every pause, updates every void. We rush to cover the silence before it starts to speak, as if the emptiness itself were a threat. But absence isn't nothing. It's the shape of meaning once lived. It's proof that something mattered enough to leave a trace. To sit with absence is to honor its weight, to feel it instead of fixing it. Every loss leaves a contour, not to be filled but to be recognized. That space between what we had and what remains is where the soul learns humility. It's where longing becomes language. We often think healing means replacing what was lost. But true healing is learning to live alongside absence, to let it breathe beside us, to see beauty in the outline instead of mourning the missing. Because presence is only visible in contrast. Without the hollow, the heart would never know its own depth. The shape of absence changes over time. At first it feels sharp, then soft, then almost sacred. What once hurt becomes a quiet room inside us, a place we visit not to ache, but to remember. Maybe that's what it means to love something fully, to accept that part of it will always exist as absence. And that emptiness, too, has its own kind of grace. Rebellion doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stops. It pauses where the world demands movement. It breathes where the system suffocates. It chooses meaning over momentum, a whisper against the machinery of noise. We think revolution must be loud, visible, destructive. But in an age that monetizes attention, the most radical act is to reclaim it, to step back from the flashing screens, to let stillness become defiance, to feel when the world insists on indifference. The quiet rebellion begins in the smallest gestures, turning off the endless feed, looking someone in the eyes and truly staying there, walking without a destination, choosing to be rather than to appear. Every act of genuine presence chips away at the empire of illusion. We have mistaken numbness for control, speed for purpose, perfection for peace. But rebellion doesn't always mean breaking the world. Sometimes it means refusing to let the world break you, to feel deeply in an era of detachment, to rest in an economy of exhaustion, to be human in a culture that wants machines. The quiet rebellion is not about escape. It's about return, to breath, to silence, to touch, to imperfection, to the heartbeat that hums beneath every distraction, reminding us that we are not algorithms, but fragile, luminous beings who still bleed, still hope, still long for the warmth behind the cold light. Maybe the future won't belong to those who shout the loudest, but to those who listen the deepest. Because the truest revolution begins not with noise, but with the courage to be quietly, stubbornly alive.